President Tinubu's highly anticipated ministerial nominees list has finally been sent to the Senate. It ends weeks of speculation about the caliber and capability of the people that are expected to make up the president's cabinet. Although the Constitution provides for a minimum of 36 ministers, only 28 names have made it to the initial list. A second list is expected. On this first installment, no states or portfolios were attached. Arise correspondent Omar Bazuaye reports that unlike before now, the ministerial list was hand-delivered by the Chief of Staff to the President. Here is a report.
Minutes after emerging from a closed-door session, Senate did what has not been done before, invoking Section 1A, 1B, and Section 12 of its standing rules to admit Femi Gbajabiamila, the Chief of Staff to President Bola Tinubu, into the chamber to hand-deliver the much-awaited executive communication from the presidency. Gbajabiamila is also the immediate past Speaker of the House of Representatives. Tinubu's ministerial list arrived the Senate few hours to the expiration of the constitutional deadline, mandating him to forward the names of those he wants to hire into his cabinet to the Senate for vetting and approval within 60 days after his inauguration. But the list unveiled turned out to be an abridged version made up of only 28 nominees with no states or portfolios attached. There was a promise that more names would follow soon. President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, quickly unveiled it to senators who themselves had waited long for the executive communication.
In compliance with the provisions of Section 147, subsection 2 of the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria 1999 as amended, I am pleased to forward to the Senate for confirmation the underlisted 28 ministerial nominees.
Dominating Tinubu's ministerial list are former governors, strong political allies believed to have worked for Tinubu's victory at the polls, and a sprinkle of technocrats. Some of the former governors include Nasir El-Rufai and Nyesom Wike, who happens to be a card-carrying member of the main opposition People's Democratic Party, PDP. Also on the list are former governor of Jigawa State, Abubakar Badaru, and former governor of Ebonyi State, Dave Umahi, who currently serves as deputy majority leader in the Senate.
Yes, the list we have so far is not complete, and I'm hoping that by the time the complete list is brought to us, we'll begin to see holistically the Executive Council of His Excellency, the President of the Federation. But for now, we have our fingers crossed and see when they bring the rest of the list.
Tinubu's list is also significantly dominated by former National Assembly members, mostly senators. Top on the list is the current acting national chairman of the governing All Progressive Congress APC, Senator Abubakar Kyari from Borno State. Also on the list is Senator John Eno from Cross River State and Senator Sani Abubakar Danladi. Former Deputy Chief Whip of the House of Representatives in Kiruka Onyejocha from Abia State, Honorable Olubumi Tunjiojo and Abubakar Momo complete the list of former National Assembly members on Tinubu's ministerial list. Former Executive Director, Nexim Bank, Stella Okotiete from Delta State, and the Special Advisor to the President on Communication Strategy and Special Duties, Dele Alaki, also made the list. Alaki is a close ally of President Tinubu. Former Commissioner in Lagos, Wale Edu, is another right-hand man of the President on the list. A surprise package on the ministerial list is the publisher of Blueprint newspapers, Mohammed Idris. One of the lead counsels in Tinubu's case at the Election Petition Tribunal, Lateef Fagbemi, and the Accord Party governorship candidate in Oyo State, Waheed Adebayo Adelabu, also made the list.
The 28 names we received We expected more than 28 because we have 36 states, and every state should have a nominee by the constitutional requirement. But they have just sent 28, and we're expecting more names. From the 28 names we've received, we are pleased with some of the names we have seen.
This time around, the 10th Senate is going to examine the characters, the personalities, the experiences, the background of every nominee.
Meanwhile, the Senate has suspended all its rules and even shifted its annual recess to enable it begin the screening and confirmation of the ministerial nominees starting from Monday. Omo Bazwaye, Arise News.
Meanwhile, in the wake of the submission of the first set of ministers designate, there are expectations that President Tinubu could be considering a restructuring of some of the existing ministries with a view to merging some, creating new ones, and scrapping others. The decision to restructure the ministries is said to be in line with the recommendations of the Oronsaye report on the restructuring of the civil service. Ministries that could be affected include those of education, youth and sports development, agricultural and rural development, solid minerals, works and housing, power, humanitarian affairs, disaster management, and social development. Leaders from the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, meeting at an emergency summit on Sunday, gave Niger military leaders 1 week to reinstate ousted President Mohamed Bazoum or face financial and travel sanctions and a no-fly zone to and from Niger. The regional leaders who met in the Nigerian capital Abuja today said other measures could include the use of force against the junta and that defense chiefs from ECOWAS will meet immediately. ECOWAS also condemned the pronouncement of support of the coup by foreign governments and foreign military contractors. The military coup in Niger has been widely condemned by neighbors and international partners, including the United States, the United Nations, the African Union, the European Union, and former colonial power, France.
We can't pretend that we didn't have the knowledge of what had happened and what is still happening. We have an hostage situation, an interruption to properly elected government of Niger Republic. Your presence here reflects your commitment to democracy, principle, and value. I appreciate that. It is a very challenging time for us, and it is time that we must demonstrate our commitment to a sustainable fact clearly open to us, that without freedom and democracy, there can be no development. There can be no end to poverty.
We'll also be taking a look at the just concluded Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg, Thursday, Friday, and the outcomes of that, summit and the interest of Africa, the attendance, the implications for global peace, solidarity, and the various dimensions of the issues discussed at that summit. And joining us now is Jideofor Adibe, who is a professor of political science and international relations at Nasarawa State University, Kefi, in Nasarawa State, North Central Nigeria. He's also a publisher and a public commentator. He joins us now to take a look at the ministerial list, in addition to a number of key developments affecting Africa Africa's relationship with the rest of the world. Professor Adibe, good to see you. Welcome to This Day Live, the Sunday talk show.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Abati.
Professor Adibe, I see you are almost color coding with me. It's like, this is planned. I want to think that is telepathy. Okay. Anyway, let's start with Niger. The leaders of ECOWAS met this afternoon in Abuja at the instance of President Bola Tinubu, who had said previously that military coup is unacceptable and will not be accepted in any part of Africa, although he's chairman of the ECOWAS Authority of Heads of States and Governments. And he had also made a similar statement when he went to Nairobi for an extraordinary meeting of the African Union. And now today, leaders of states in West Africa took a resolute decision and said what has happened in Niger, the takeover of power, the detention of the president and his family and members of his cabinet will not be accepted. And they've now given a 7-day ultimatum, including sanctions, closure of the border, and also likely military intervention in Niger, just to send a very strong message to Niger. The EU has also similarly said it is suspending aid to Niger. The US and also the United Nations have also similarly condemned the development in Niger. What's your take on the development in Niger, and what does the coup in Niger mean for democracy in West Africa?
Well, thank you very much. I think the first thing to understand is that the democratic space itself is elastic. It can contract and it can expand. And you can also have democratic reversals when the gains of democracy are reversed, especially in French-speaking West Africa and French-speaking African countries. We've seen increasing tendency for military usurpation of power. Prior to this, what we had was constitutional coups by which a number of elected leaders decided to extend their term limit. So, but the one in Niger is very interesting for a number of other reasons. First, you will recall that when Mali decided they no longer want American base, it moved it to Niger. So both America and France, they have military bases in Niger. And as you know, there's the current president has a strong, leaning towards the West, which runs against the trend in the country. There's anti-West European, especially anti-France feelings. So that is one of the things you are going to take into consideration. In fact, the former president Mohammed had argued that the French military contractor Wagner had been mounting campaigns against the government. Because if you look at Mali and Mali, Central African Republic, even Burkina Faso, you see there's a strong presence of Wagner, the Russian military contractor. And in the wake of that military coup, there were some people carrying the Russian flag, which might be a kind of a thumb down to the Western powers. So it's let's see what really ECOWAS can do, because don't forget that there had been coups in Guinea and in Mali, and ECOWAS have been engaging on shuttle diplomacy without being able to restore constitutional order. Is it likely to do so in Niger now? You can say that the West European countries have strong interests in making sure that it is reversed because the president has strong leaning towards them. But so also is Wagner, so is also Russia, even though he did not openly support the coup. interested in making sure that the bases do not stand, and that the coup is an opportunity for the country to extend its influence in the Sahel. So we see how it goes. One of the things we should point out is that it's increasingly more difficult for West African leaders to do as they previously did with ECOWAS, or as they did in Côte d'Ivoire in 2010, where they forced Gbagbo to leave office, or in 2016, where they forced Adama Barrow in the Gambia to leave after Yahya Jammeh refused to leave, because most of them now are engaged in one form of coup or the other. Our friend Jibo Ibrahim wrote a piece recently in the Premium Times, in which he argued that electoral malpractices is itself a form of military coup. So, with so many of the leaders themselves either illegally extending their tenures, they seem to lack the moral unction to push hard for a reversal of unconstitutional change of power in the subcontinent.
Okay, I'll come to the point you raised about Wagner and the countries in Africa, because that's also something that is related to our next line of conversation, the Russia-Africa Summit. But let me ask you, is coup a solution to insecurity and bad governance? Because what these coup plotters, whether in Guinea-Conakry or Mali, or Chad or Niger they talk about insecurity, they talk about bad governance. Now, what alternative can they possibly offer?
I think the military coup also itself is a demonstration of frustration with our democracy. But you posed a legitimate question, what can be the alternative? Many of the young people that did not grow up or were not matured during the period of the period of apogee of military rule in Africa, for example, will not understand what it means. So while some will see any change of government from the crisis of governance that they felt democracy has failed to resolve, while some of them will opt for military, anything but the existing arrangement. Some will opt for that option. Others are going for, delinking from the state and moving into some kind of chauvinistic contraptions where they believe, for example, they will better be able to negotiate meanings. So it's not really that it is a solution, but it's a question of what an alternative. We know, for example, that those of us who are old enough to experience military rule, that we will argue that the worst form of civil rule will always be better than the best of military regimes. But for those who didn't live through that, and you see the sort of crisis in governance, you see the government, you see the corruption everywhere, you see insecurity, some will believe, okay, maybe the military will be in a better position to handle this. But of course, the experiences from Mali and Burkina Faso, where the military overthrew the civilian authorities, partly on grounds that the civilian authorities were not able to deal with the jihadists. We have not seen much difference. So it is just that people are looking for alternatives. And to the extent, for example, they don't rely or they cannot believe that they can use the electoral process effectively to change government. Any other alternatives, people are willing to welcome because, they feel powerless at the same time as they don't feel they are getting the dividends of democracy.
Okay. The European Union has suspended budget support and security cooperation with Mali. Mali is one of the last zones for the Western world in Africa. Okay? So, if the EU is saying, we will impose sanctions, and then now you have the ECOWAS saying we'll close borders, we're giving you 7-day ultimatum, and there will be intervention. I can understand. The EU gives, Mali over 503 million euros per annum, and they have a plan. So that's concrete. But for ECOWAS saying we will impose sanctions, do you think sanctions still work these days? After all, those sanctions have not worked with regard to the Russo-Ukrainian war?
Well, it didn't work, as you rightly pointed out. It hasn't worked so far in Russo-Ukrainian war, at least not as effectively as the Western world thought. It has also not worked in Mali, as you know, because it's almost 2 years that they've been engaging in this shuttle diplomacy to see if they could convince the military authorities to restore constitutional order. So we can say at this stage that more likely, if you go to the UN Security Council, more likely Russia will veto it. Because it's become, the French West African country has become a new battleground, in my own opinion, where you see a receding influence of the West, of France in particular, and an attempt for Russia to project its power onto that space. So it's become another, especially now in this context of the war, where some people believe that one of the aims of the Western world in that war is to turn Ukraine into a sort of Vietnam for Russia, and by so doing whittle down its influence, whittle down its power, and whittle down its ability to project power onto the global stage. So it's an interesting time. Don't forget, let me mention what happened now in the second US-Africa summit. You know, one of the interesting things that happened there is that Putin has promised to help African countries to, get some kind of compensation for the damages done by colonialism. You can say it's just plain, it's just rhetoric, but it's the kind of things that African leaders.
I'll come to that. But let's talk still on Niger, which is a neighboring country. President Tinubu is chairman of ECOWAS and all of that. Why is a coup in Niger an issue for us in Nigeria? And why should the fact that there are coups across about 5 West African countries, Niger, Chad, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Conakry, an issue for us in Nigeria? Yeah. Is it because President Tinubu is chairman of ECOWAS, or there are other things that we need to worry about, particularly the Mali effect, as it is known in international relations?
No. In the current, presently, what we call non-interference in the internal affairs of other countries, sovereignty, is not what it used to be. There is also what we call responsibility to protect.
R2P?
In this sense, that's one of R2P is one of the justifications countries now invoke, to be able to interfere or intervene in countries. Because when citizens feel powerless, then it becomes an obligation. The second reason is that what affects one country these days tend to affect all. For example, if there is we share border with Niger, if the crisis gets out of hand, we will be overwhelmed, by refugees. So at least from the perspective of self-preservation and national self-interest, we have to be interested. But let me say that our interest precedes that of Bola Tinubu being the president of the authorities of the heads of states. No, it's always been there. The supplementary protocol on democracy and many other protocols on good governance clearly said that coups are no longer acceptable modes of coming to power. And but what we have seen, it used to be that the coup makers would quickly civilianize themselves, take off their khakis and put on suits or abadas. And then they started to extend the tenures, and recently they're more brazenly now come up to overthrow constituted authority. And let me also say that quite often the sentiments on the streets are with the coup makers. That is the irony. For example, if you go to Niger, you'll find out that there's strong anti-Western sentiments. And Bazoum is very, very pro-West, just like Sissoufou, the man that handed over power to him, was very pro-West. And this, contradicts, it's in contrast to the popular sentiments in the streets, which is against France, against the West, and increasingly leaning towards Russia. We don't know whether it's genuinely leaning towards Russia or whether it's just an attempt to thumb down on the Western powers.
Okay, very good. It's good that you mentioned Russia, and we can just go quickly to the next topic. Earlier on, you talked about military bases in Africa, military bases showing up particularly also in West Africa. The Russians, through the mercenary military wing of the Russian government, the Wagner Group, they are in Central African Republic, they are in Sudan, they are in Mali. The people even invited them to Mali. Now, we just had the Russian-African Summit. At that Russian-African Summit, attendance was poor compared to 2019. 17 African leaders showed up, even if total, we had 43 international organizations in attendance. But you had Mali and the Central African Republic leaders going there and expressing gratitude to Russia. Do you think that there is a problem here? Do you think that the coup plotters in Niger are likely to embrace Russia and the influence that foreign military bases exercise in Africa? How much of a threat does that pose to stability and democratic consolidation?
Well, it is actually a threat. It is because, especially from the perspective of citizens, if the citizens believe that a particular bloc, say the Western powers, are not doing good enough, to put on military bases they see as further compromising their sovereignty, their respect. So, and you can see with a tiny country like Niger of only 25 million people having 2 military bases, that I think helped to inflame the anti-Western feelings. Apart from the fact that France has its hold on its former colonies, was not giving it a breathing space, even to have their own currencies. So the sentiment has to be respected that having military bases is not the way to go. But then the Western powers, or the Eastern powers, or the other powers, they need it. That's one of the things they have to negotiate. But in the case of, say, Niger, for example, will Wagner be the solution? We have to find a way of moving beyond the propaganda from both sides. Both sides are giving a lot of propaganda, so we do not know. In Central African Republic, for example, you can see that the Wagner even they have some official positions. I mean, the Russian nationals. So is it that, and another thing, for example, that they said during the Second Africa Summit that resonated very well with the African country was they said they want to promote a multipolar world order. In other words, it is not a world in which there's just one superpower. Yeah, because they believe that was, that has been working against the interest of many countries. But of course, it is about promoting Russian interest. So we don't know. We don't know how this will work out. But I don't think that very much is going to come out of this threat of ECOWAS for the use of force. For sure, Russia will veto it in the Security Council.
Okay, will you say that the Russian-African Summit is a miscalculation? Russia calling for an African summit in St. Petersburg at a time when Russia had pulled out of the Green Deal, Black Sea Grain Initiative.
Black Sea
Grain Initiative,
I'm not sure.
Which affects mostly African countries. And then these African countries went there. 43 of them attended in 2019. This time around, the 17 showed up. But Russia is blaming the US and its allies. So do you think that our leaders are beginning to wake up?
Okay. I wouldn't put it in such ideological terms. First of all, 17 heads of government came, about 5 vice presidents, and there were 43 delegations. Yes, it was below expectation, but Russia wanted to make a point that despite the war it was having, things were still going normally. I think part of the reasons that there was probably a relatively low attendance, especially from some African countries, was Biden had taken this hard stance that if you're either for them or you are against them. So it's akin to what happened during the Senate election of the Senate president, where people were showing their hands on who they support. And nobody wanted to, give his neck to the gallows man. So in that sense, because of the way it was now framed, or Biden saw it, that if you chum me up to the West, if you chum me up to Russia, it means you are taking a position against them. So the countries that were able to be strong enough, are bold enough to do that, were countries like South Africa that had a very strong, historical ties. Small countries like the French-speaking countries that were already in the bad books of France. So I don't think we can make much out of it. Don't forget that Russia is still in war. It's still in a war situation. And once the war is over, completely over one day, many of African countries will not like to be aligned one way or the other.
Okay.
They will not like to be aligned.
Well,
so I will not pass a judgment about the attendance.
Okay, President Putin has now promised African countries that, okay, they will get grains, they will get wheat, and all of that. He has promised aid
free of charge
and all of that. But we have to place this in context. The meeting that took place on Thursday and Friday, we contrast it from this desk with the meeting that took place last month, when African leaders led by Cyril Ramaphosa approached Putin and said, oh, look, we need peace. This war against Ukraine should end for the interest of the developing world. Putin snubbed them. He was interrupting them. He was interrupting Ramaphosa. While African leaders were with him, he was bombing Ukraine. Okay, this time around, he tried to be nice. He said, oh, okay, you have a point. We'll take a look at it. Should African leaders be subjecting themselves to this patronizing, paternalistic approach by either Russia or any other country at all, within the context of international diplomacy and relations?
No, I actually don't think that, what happened wasn't really the best, but it was the first time in history that you go to African countries who go to the other side of the world to broker peace. It used to be the other way around, that they would always be the one to monitor peace, to do all things for us. So on the level of initiative, I actually applauded them, despite the fact that the bombing took place during that period. But I also think that there was an opportunity this time around for Putin to make amends. He probably realized that, he didn't handle the situation as best as he could have done. So he did say something that, it was actually their initiative that made him to think in certain directions. Whether he was saying it as a gesture to make them feel good, it is irrelevant. The important thing, the way I see it, is that for the first time in history, you have some countries from Africa going to the West to broker peace. They may not have succeeded, but that was a big step. And who knows, subsequently, they have broken the ice. They have shown it can be done. Subsequently, things might be better. Their input might be better recognized. And Putin, has also tried to show that he appreciated them. He promised, free grain. He promised to cancel debts. Just the usual rhetoric. I think Africa will be needed more by both the West and Russia. And it depends now on how Africa plays its card. It stands to gain the best of both worlds.
Okay, briefly, before I take the last topic of this discussion with you, what do you think of the notable absentees that were not there? President William Ruto of Kenya stayed away. President Tinubu did not show up. He sent his Vice President Shetima, who first went to Rome where he went to eat pepper soup and jollof rice. He went for a food show before he went to Russia. You know, I mean, Paul Kagame was not there. Tshisekedi of DRC was not there. But yes, 17 people showed up. Do you think we need to make any heavy weather out of the absenteeism?
Dr. Abati, all the people you mentioned are very strong allies of the West. For Kagame, you mentioned, don't forget, has a deal with Britain about resettling political asylum seekers. So you don't, it's a survival thing. As I said, it is too early to know, to make much out of it. The war in Ukraine will come to an end one day. And we are trying to look at how will the war impact what we call, the distribution of power in the global system. Will it whittle the influence of Russia? Will it whittle the influence of America? These are the things that will determine the direction. None of these are Biden. If Biden gets reelected, is he going to continue the same policy as he pursued during this time? These are the questions that will, occupy our minds. The meeting in St. Petersburg, attended by only 17 heads of states, we shouldn't make too much out of it. It's very symbolic. It just, the Western world is trying to make capital out of it, but I'm not sure it's the way it should be interpreted.
Okay, very quickly, Professor Adibe. As part of the introduction, we talked about the ministerial list in Nigeria. Do you think that the president of Nigeria has broken the law? Section 147 sub 2 of the 1999 Constitution, as you know, says, look, fifth alteration of that Constitution thereby says you have to submit your list of ministers within 60 days. Now the president has submitted 28 names covering 25 states. The same Constitution says, you have to cover all the 36 states. We have been told by the Chief of Staff to the President that 30 more names will come. But that will be outside the framework of the Constitution. Do you think that even that submission is illegal?
Well, if you talk about legality and illegality, what is the prescribed punishment? There is no punishment, as far as I am aware of, that 60-day window doesn't say what will happen if you fail to submit within the 60-day window. But let me just say that one would have expected that for a president that was somebody who was declared president in February, you had all those time, you went to France, you stayed away because people were disturbing you, we were told, and then you ended up submitting very close, I think it was 58th day to the 60th day or so, thereabout. Well, we don't have any excuse. We don't have comprehensive reasons from theirs, that made them delay that way, especially given the fact that he was able to take decisive actions on matters like removal of fuel subsidy. The second aspect to it is what message does he really want to communicate? We know, for example, that a big part of the albatross on this government was the Muslim ticket. And I believe he was largely successful in trying to muffle those controversies and murmurings by especially the way he chose his service chiefs. But this time around, if you look at some of the people that were on the list, somebody like Nasiru El-Rufai is a highly polarizing individual. No matter what you can talk about his technocratic ability, yes, he has ability like many other people. And Tinubu appointed a service chief from Southern Kaduna today, and they were very, very excited about that. And then you chose El-Rufai, who, is not their best friend, will always remind them of a certain epoch, a certain period in their political journey. And the same thing you go to Nyesom Wike. As for as long as Nyesom Wike is under people like Nyesom Wike and Nasiru El-Rufai, it will make the journey of your ability to achieve reconciliation very difficult. You don't put people who play active role in certain controversies on the front seat. You can still reward them in other ways for supporting your government. But for me, I think it's a blight on the ministerial list. Yes, people talk about balance between the gender. I appreciate the fact that he selected 7 or 8 women, and that I hope more will be there. I also hope that there will be at least one person with a disability to take care of the interest of people with disability. And it's a constitutional requirement that each state should have one. And then I would think there's also the other requirement that you need to use your cabinet to communicate a particular message. That message is, I thought I want to believe that it has to do with reconciliation and unity. I'm happy that people like Bayo Onanuga, who promoted provincialism and irredentism, were not there so far. And, so what's the point of, if you bring him in, it makes it difficult to achieve reconciliation with the people he was quarreling with. I'm not saying he was the only culprit. Femi Fani Kayode was another. By not including Femi Fani Kayode and Festus Kenyamo, who were mentioned in the European Union report as promoting fake news, you probably gave the impression that, look, I want to respect the sensibilities of the international, the European Union. At the same time, you are putting people like Nyesom Wike. It was reported by BBC that Rivers State election was rigged. Who rigged it? So, and Nyesom Wike had been a governor, had been a minister. Why should he be a minister again? I think it's a blight on that.
Okay, Professor Adibe, let me ask you. Well, maybe you are making too much of an issue out of Festus Keyamo not being on the list, Mr. Bayo Onanuga not being there, Femi Fanika. You never know. 13 more names, we've been told, will be added. Maybe when those names come up, they will show up. And in any case, there is patronage. The president of Nigeria can dispense up to about 5,000 positions of patronage. But there is an issue, an underlying issue that people have been talking about. People say that the president seems to be more committed to political associates and that the list looks like a political rally. And that it's not just a political rally, that it looks like some Lagos people are dominating the list. Even Yorubas are complaining that only people who play politics in Lagos seem to be the favored people, and that under Buhari we complained about northernization. Now some people are talking about Lagosnization of the federal team.
Yes, I agree with you, Dr. Abati. There are actually at least three elements I believe most governments look at. You reward people who support you. There is the constitutional requirement. And then there is the issue of people called competence, or people you need, technocrats. And my own idea that since optics is very central to this, he also has to be sensitive to the fact, now coming back to what he said, that under Buhari we talked about Fulanization. Now there are already murmurings that the appointments so far are Yoruba-centric, and that when the cabinets are allotted, we will see a reenactment of Buhari, whereby the juicy ministries will go to the Yoruba. And some people within the Yoruba also say, no, just like we had in the time of Buhari. That is more about Lagos people, as you rightly pointed. Remember when people were accusing Buhari of nepotism, people from the north will also say, look, it's essentially a Fulani and Kanuri thing. So Buhari, I think handlers of the president should be very mindful that he has done relatively well in trying to use some appointments to muffle the disaffection arising from the Muslim ticket. He should not, he should be very sensitive that he doesn't create another problem that will, further undermine the basis of his legitimacy.
Okay, I have one more question before you go. And this has to do with the 4 governors on that list. Today, some of the papers have been saying, Nyesom Wike had said he will not want to be a liability. Only one candidate can come from Rivers State. He will not be interested in becoming a minister. But his name appeared in the list of 28. There is a video that's also circulating. Nasir El-Rufai, former governor of Kaduna State, who had also said, oh, he was a minister in his 40s, so why would he want to be a minister at 63? And now his name showed up in the list sent to the National Assembly. So do you think these guys have a moral question to answer? And then quickly, the controversy is also about the failure to identify portfolios. Screening, we're told, will start tomorrow.
Yeah.
What are they screening if we don't know what these guys are likely to be recruited for?
Yeah, let me start with the last question. I agree with the one about there are merits in attaching portfolios. If you attach portfolio, then people will be screening you for a particular competence for a particular office. The flip side to that is that if the president decides to shuffle the cabinet and move you to another ministry, he may have to go back again to the National Assembly because you were confirmed on the basis of a particular ministry. So I think by not attaching portfolio, you allow yourself that flexibility of being able to move competence from one area to another. That's one thing. So, and the other thing about governors being there, yes, Nasir El-Rufai said it that, he wouldn't like to repeat classes and all that. But over and beyond that is that he's a very polarizing figure. And I personally don't think he did mention before he was going to go abroad to study or go into the private sector. And I'll urge him. He's still vibrant to do that. He will make it more difficult for the government to promote conciliation, especially people with the Christian faith. El-Rufai, as clever as he is, or he wants to believe he is known for incendiary remarks and polarizing, a very polarizing figure. Yes, on Wike, the same thing, it's not that he opposed the article that was the issue, it's the manner he did it in a rather rougher manner without any poise. And after being governor, you can say what happened to the rest of the G5? Did he throw them under the bus? And away from that politics of the G5 is what is the morale? You have been governor, you have been a minister. From minister, you went to be a governor. And after that, you want to go back. Give other people a chance. Whatever it is there that others are enjoying, if it is enjoying it, let others go and have their own bite.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Adibe. I don't think we should talk about public appointments in terms of enjoyment. I think the emphasis should be more on service.
I put it quote unquote, enjoyment, quote and then quote.
Yeah, because earlier too, you talked about juicy positions. I don't know which positions are juicy if we place the proper accent.
That's Nigerians. That's Nigerians created it. Nigerians talk about juicy positions.
Anyway, thank you very much for joining us on This Is the Live, the Sunday Talk Show.
Thank you.